Rugby Championship round number 6, folks. The penultimate match sees the All Blacks hosting the Wallabies from Wellington, where our record is not particularly good. The squads have been named. We will go through them, some stats for you, some recent history predictions, and you guys can let us know your thoughts on how this one is going to go. Pressure is on the ABs. They, at 2-3 in this Rugby Championship campaign, can finish with a kind of even record with a win. The record in Wellington, as I said, is awful, so there's that to overcome. And just, a fair few question marks around the side which need answering. They have made a few changes. And for the Wallabies, well, man, they're not going to go through this campaign winless, having picked up that win over the Pumas. Some people would say they got a moral victory in the game last week. A moral victory doesn't count for much, but they were dead and buried against the ABs in Sydney and managed to mount a kind of stirring comeback. But can they go one better and continue the Wellington curse? Well, let's see. The All Black squad is relatively stable, with the biggest talking point being the dropping, if you want to call it that, of D-Mac to the bench and Bodie Barrett elevated to the starting role. That was the first question asked of Razor at the press conference. What's the deal with D-Mac getting dropped? And to be fair, D-Mac started every game for the All Blacks at 10 under Razor. So if it was anybody else, you might just say it's time to give him a break because he's played a lot of games. Razor kind of said the same thing, but you kind of feel like he's been partially dropped. He said that he'd planned to give Bowden a go, and the fact that he and TJ have played a lot of rugby together in Wellington, that experience kind of counts for a lot. So it's TJ at 9, Bodie at 10, a very familiar Wellington duo for all those years at the Hurricanes. But that does mean the likes of Ratsimo, who was really good last week, he's going to ride the pine, and likewise D-Mac is going to get a shot from the bench. There are many who would say D-Mac's best spot in the All Blacks is either in the 22 or 23 jumper, just because he's maybe more versatile as the kind of super sub than necessarily the starting 10. But, I mean, barring a few offloads, which just needed to be kind of kept calm, but I don't know if he deserves the amount of flack he's been getting, which has been large. Like, he's got a real bullseye painted on him, rather than the whole picture of that, which is the ABs currently. The front row is the same, to group with Taylor and Lomax. Taylor was really busy last week with his ball carries. He had 14 of them, so really busy around the paddock. Scotty Barrett continues on in the second row. I think a lot of us would like to see him kind of grab the team by the scruff of the neck if they are in a pressure situation, to stop things from kind of snowballing and getting out of control. That's kind of what you want to see from the captain, whether it's shouting at the dudes, whether it's being the kind of calm, cool head who just speaks to everyone and gets them on the same page. Whatever his style is, it doesn't really matter. But when we're under the pump, we have looked a little bit kind of rudderless at times, and that's not what you want to see. So that's what your captain is there for, and there's a bunch of vice captains as well. Tupou Vaa'i has been one of the certain bright sparks of the All Blacks this Rugby Championship for sure. His work at disrupting the Aussie lineout is certainly going to be vital. Wallace Atiti, likewise, if you're looking for bright spots, with his big ball carrying at number 6, was doing a good job. And then Sam Cane, 100th and potentially final appearance for him for the ABs, so big congratulations to him. They brought him up in the press conference as well. Genuinely a guy, I think, a bit unappreciated by the New Zealand rugby public, partly because of the fact that he does the unsexy stuff, which doesn't get the kind of highlight reels, the stuff which we maybe don't always see. It's kind of like the same reason props never get nominated for World Player of the Year, because nobody picking an award or picking a highlight is going to be choosing the kind of scrummaging stuff. Likewise, hitting rucks and making tackles ain't always the sexiest thing, but that tends to be what he's good at. He did miss a pretty bloody crucial tackle last week, though, so he would like to up that aspect of his game for his 100th performance. And then Ardie Savea, who was Mr. Tackling Machine himself last week with 16. He continues on at number 8. TJ and Bodie already mentioned, and then the midfield of ALB and Rico Ioane with the Geordie Barrett injury. So that's the kind of logical choice, minimal changes. A lot of us would like to see him Proctor in there at 13, but Razor doesn't seem to want to chuck him in the deep end just yet. So ALB takes the familiar 12 jersey and gets a game alongside Rico. That also means that David Havili comes into the 23. I think if you did a poll of New Zealand rugby fans between Havili and Proctor in the 23 jumper, it'd be a bit of a landslide for Proctor, but then Havili's had experience, certainly more than Proctor has, and he covers a few positions as well. In terms of the outside backs, Caleb Clark continues on the left wing, Severis continues on the right wing, and then Will Jordan, who beat like 6 defenders, scored a nice try last week at fullback. Maybe had one of his better starts at fullback because they've been limited for him. He's usually a winger for the ABs, but had one of his better starts at fullback for the ABs last week. So we'll be kind of looking to pick up where he left off. Bench-wise, Almoa, Williams, and Tossi is the same front row replacements. Paddy Tuipulotu takes the spot of Sam Darry, so an experienced campaigner for Razor on the bench. Fingers crossed he gets trusted with a few more minutes. Jacobson's still there as well. And then I mentioned Ratimati Mack and Havili making out the back replacement. So that is the AB's lineup. It is a bit of changes, especially 9 and 10, but largely pretty familiar stuff. For the Wallabies, they've also made a few changes, but largely kept things pretty stable. Bell, Fassler, and Tupou. Starting front row, you feel like did a pretty decent job. I think Lomax was starting to get some good pay as the game went on against the Wallabies scrum, but it certainly wasn't like what we saw with Argentina, South Africa last week, where it was basically like a kind of gift penalty every time. So that's a bit of good news for the Wallabies. Frost and Williams continue on the second row. So despite the fact that Salakai Aloto added a bunch of impact from the bench when he came on, they are keeping him to that role. And maybe that's part of the reason that, the Wallabies did so well in that game, is the kind of careful management of the bench. Have a guy who is maybe one of your premier guys in Salakai Loto, albeit coming back from injury at the time, to bolster the lineup when he comes on, rather than having a guy that you maybe don't trust that much and are reluctant to put on, but you just chuck him on at the end. I don't know, just a very different style of bench management. I still feel like it's an area where the All Blacks aren't getting it right, and Joe Schmidt did it pretty well last week. So Salakai Loto continues on in that role. Valentini, McCright, and Wilson, the back row. Really impressive guys, all three of them last week. Very, very busy with their work rate. McCright in particular, what a breath of fresh air that guy is. As I said in the last video, I still like Tizano and what he brings to the game in terms of doing the kind of Sam Cane stuff with all the tackles and whatnot. But Fraser McCright, man, if you can get him in the side, he's more or less the first name off the team sheet in that Wallaby side at the moment. Ball carries, tries, tackles, threaded the breakdown, proper, man alive. And then Harry Wilson, 21 tackles in the captain's berth last week, will continue to lead from the front. Change at 9, which sees Jake Gordon take over from Nick White. I think a lot of Wallabies fans probably would have called for that. There might have been also some call for changes at number 10, but Lolosio kind of continues on. He did manage to bust a few tackles last week, and I think the Wallabies had 100% from the tee. But, you still feel like the management of the game could go up a notch. I don't know. If it's a confidence thing, he certainly looks very confident at Super Rugby level. Paisami and Ikitau continue on in the midfield. Ikitau, kind of like McCright, has one of been maybe the first names off the team sheet, although maybe towards the back line. He's been putting in a bit of magic with his offloads and ability to draw a tackler. And then outside backs sees Dylan Peach get a starter here at Corambetti, who has a wrist injury. And I think kind of a welcome change, because I don't know that Corambetti has done enough to necessarily justify coming back from Japan for this series. Callaway also has not really hit his full straps, and then Tom Wright's maybe been the best of the bunch in the outside backs. Reserves, Painga Mosa continues to ride the pine, and again, maybe it's looking for that boost from the bench rather than necessarily just chucking him in to start straight away. Isaac Kailea comes in for James Slipper in this one. I know Slipper got his record, kind of like Sam Cane's doing for the ABs with his 100th. Slipper broke the Wallabies record, but I'm kind of glad to see Kailea getting there because he seems to be the future. Alalatoa continues on. Salakai Loto, like I mentioned, then Longy Gleeson, who was another guy who had good impact from the bench that we are looking on with a bit of envy from here in New Zealand. Tate McDermott, 2 try assists from the bench, and then 2 changes with the back replacements, and Ben Donaldson and Josh Fluke also coming in as the back replacement. So neither side attempted to go for a 6-2 split, but both more kind of traditional with their 5-3 splits of backs and forwards on the bench. Some stats, like I promised you. 12 offloads from New Zealand last week, but sometimes maybe, I think the old Wallabies were 3. Like 12 is a lot. Sometimes just, like there's a spectrum of like playing totally safe rugby and playing a bit of super rugby on steroids or whatever at test level. Maybe just inch it a little bit towards the kind of safer territory. Still be the AB, still stick to your DNA, but sometimes just throw the sensible pass. Sometimes just, take the safe option. Just take the carry into contact and recycle the ball instead of going for the miracle offload, which doesn't always work. we'll see if they kind of tone things down. But the last game was, 19 turnovers conceded, which is way, way too many. Plus 2 yellow cards shows indiscipline from the ABs again. The actual penalty count wasn't too bad. We only had 9 penalties conceded, and if you can keep it under 10, you tend to be doing pretty well. But 2 yellow cards, whereas the Wallabies had none. Was not a good look and certainly almost cost the ABs. And the final 20-minute curse goes on. This rugby championship, we have not scored a single point in the final 20s. It's very un-All Black-like to finish games so weakly. I mean, even against Fiji, I think we only scored 7. So they've not been kind of hitting the final 20 as an area of strength. It's been an absolute area of weakness. Then combine that with the Wellington curse, which sees recent results of a loss to Argentina, a loss to Ireland, a draw against Australia, a draw against South Africa, and a loss to South Africa at test matches. Like, we did beat France back in 2018 when they sent a B team down here, but we really need a win in Wellington. So, yeah, there's a few less than stellar stats going for the ABs in those departments. For the Aussies, they'll be happy last week with how they dominated territory and possession in the second half of the match. They actually conceded 2 more penalties than the ABs with 11, but they didn't get any cards, which, man, if you can play 13 against 15, you're putting yourself in a pretty good position. Line out, though, is still sloppy. They missed 4 last week. I think it was operating at 75%, which is just too low. Anything, like even below 85 is not great. You want to be in the 90s ideally, so 75 is pretty poor, and they lost like 6 balls at ruck time. The All Blacks lost some balls at ruck time as well, so both sides will be looking to be a bit more kind of secure over the ball. Last 5, as I mentioned, is 5-0 to the ABs, including last week's close one. There have been a few close ones, man. The one prior to that's in Dunedin, 23-20, and there's a 39-37 back there in 2022, but there are a couple of blowouts. Eden Park 2022 was 40 points to 14, and then the Melbourne Cricket Ground was 38 points to 7. So we've had a few close calls in these last 5 from an All Blacks point of view, but the Wallabies haven't gotten it done for a wee while. But that being said, the last time they played at Wellington, like I mentioned, was a draw. So if Reece Hodge could have won that one if he kicked that final penalty. Will this be the game where they get that done? Not according to the bookies. The bookies are saying the All Blacks by 18. Which is a lot of confidence. And then the Rugby Forecast algorithm goes a step further and saying 24 points. So the All Blacks predicted to finally click and put the Wallabies to the sword. Wellington, Sky Stadium, 7:05. Nika Umashukeli, the Georgian, is the ref for this one. Do you guys see the Wallabies getting hammered? Or do you think the pressure on the All Blacks in terms of this Rugby Championship not going that stellar changes at 9 and 10, and then the Wellington record will be detrimental for how the performance levels sit? Thank you for your time. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. There's certainly going to be more rugby content coming your way. Thank you so much, and I'll talk to you guys again soon. Ta-ra.